Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, The Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. The Minnesota Twins are looking forward to another great season in 2023, led by the return of All-Stars Carlos Correa and Brian Buxton. With the return of numerous players who were injured in 2022 and some new acquisitions, another division crown and a return to the World Series are in their sights. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Welcome. Access to Democracy welcomes you back. Alan Miller sitting in today as guest host or whatever you want to call it. We have a first-time guest, and he's been a hard individual to pin down. Deepinder Mayell of the Minnesota Civil Liberties Union, American Civil Liberty Union, Minnesota. And welcome as a first-time guest. We've had civil liberties programs probably for the last 15 years at least, and I'm really happy to have you now because Lord knows we have never needed a protector of our civil liberties as much as we do now. Why don't you give us a little bit background about yourself first?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alan, for having me. I'm really happy to be on the show. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it is a critical time for civil liberties in the United States. So prior to coming to the ACLU of Minnesota, I was the executive director of the Center for New Americans at the University of Minnesota Law School, which was a program it was a clinical program training students to become litigators, but really also focused on impact litigation around the immigration system. And it was the most robust program of its kind in the country. Prior to that, I was at the Advocates for Human Rights and was a program director in one of their programs. And prior to that, I was over in Massachusetts as a legal aid attorney, representing victims of domestic violence.
So you've had different aspects of civil liberties and protecting individuals in your career. And we have one thing in common that we found out.
That's right.
We're both from Long Island.
That's right. I've dropped the G. Well, I tried to. It sneaks out.
But I have too. But people still say to me, you're from the New York area, aren't you? Yeah. And it's amazing.
That's
you
right.
can't shake it. Well, talking about civil liberties and Minnesota, and we're very fortunate to be in a state that recognizes that there are civil liberties and tries to protect them. And even though there are a lot of individuals in this state who will fight that, we've been very fortunate with the administration that we've had, et cetera. And you know, I could go right to the abortion decision.
That's right.
And last year's really shock from the Supreme Court. Why don't we start there?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is one of the most critical kind of landscape shifts for civil liberties is the United States Supreme Court. And there was last year's decisions, and there was this year's decisions, and I think every term, this July, when the decisions are all kind of finished up, we are going to be holding our breath and watching and feeling what probably feels like a gut punch for some time now.
Well, the Supreme Court did some things with their decisions this year that have never been done. For instance, taking a case that wasn't really a case and making a decision on it.
That's right. So I think you're talking about the 303 Creative case.
303 Creative is it.
So we're talking about a case here where someone preemptively sued. There was a Colorado law that bans discrimination for a business. This was a graphic designer who did not want to make designs for a wedding website for a same-sex couple. There was no couple involved. It was a preemptive challenge of the suit, and that's the way this case was essentially designed. And it was designed to challenge and be a relook and a retake at the Masterpiece Bake Shop case, which was decided in previous terms, which threw out this notion that somebody has the right to discriminate, the First Amendment right to discriminate.
But the Supreme Court has never taken a case challenging something that hasn't come to pass. And this was only in the mind of the creator of that case, really, of the woman who said she didn't want to serve same-sex couple marriages.
Yep.
But there was no pending case with her.
I mean, it was surprising. I mean, there was certainly, standing issues there, and the outcome. The outcome leaves a kind of vague outcome, right? And one that has a significant chilling effect, right? People who are in same-sex couples are worried now when they walk into a private business of whether that business somehow has a right to discriminate against them. And I know there's a carve-out for what is custom kind of businesses, but it's a very vague term. What does that mean, right? Is it someone who owns a nail shop? Is it someone who has an auto decal company? What is customized expressive speech, and how far is the right to discriminate against same-sex couples go?
And of course,
so the door is open.
We have a Supreme Court where several justices indicated that they want to go further and they want to undo rights. Up until Dobbs, we thought that once you had rights, that they were cemented in pretty well.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and Dobbs is that first time where you see this civil liberty or civil right taken back, and now there are 22 states that have severe restrictions or bans on abortion. So you have this patchwork in the United States where access to this fundamental right has been denied. And we're seeing the ramifications, and we will continue to see them. Now, the state of Minnesota is fortunate, right, because, and one of the victories we had was at the state legislature, the codification of the right to abortion. But we're surrounded by states that don't have those rights, and even in Minnesota, the access to abortion, the limits, the amount of people who are seeking it, the wait times, they're all going up because of this patchwork that's been put into place.
And yet, yesterday, there was a case from the Supreme Court of Mexico, which really was diametrically opposed to Dobbs, where they legalized abortion in Mexico, as many of the Central American countries have done. Central American countries, which are primarily Catholic countries, certainly at odds with the abortion principle, and yet these countries have recognized the need and the necessity, and I was really surprised and pleased to see the Mexican Supreme Court yesterday decision.
And that's another great point, because it should be noted that the public supports, the overwhelming, the majority of the public supports abortion care. So, to have a decision that's so against it. And the other thing about the Dobbs decision, it does not outlaw abortion across the country.
Correct.
Right? It just takes the decision out of a woman's hands. And says that, well, if a state legislature approves it, and we know historically what state legislatures have been comprised of, right?
Yes.
Mostly men, if they approve it and give
Older
you the power,
white men, mostly.
then it's okay, right? So it's a very strange outcome, and it's an outcome that really fundamentally affects a very basic fundamental civil liberty.
And, you know, it just is frightening, the concept of where are we going to go next with the Supreme Court. As you said, you know, we will just live on tenterhooks, really, until we see some of the pending cases get decided. You have had some great success here in Minnesota, however, with your litigation. So why don't you talk about a couple of the cases that really have come out of ACLU backing in Minnesota?
Well, you know, the interesting thing, and one of the things that makes the ACLU of Minnesota so powerful, is that we have an integrated advocacy approach, right? So we have litigation, but we also have a policy department, which is up at the State House, lobbying during the state legislative cycle. And we also have a community organizing and education component of our work. And when you see all three of those working together, you see significant impact. And I can go turn to our work in restoring the rights to vote for felons. Now, this was an issue that has been going on for over a decade, one that we litigated and sued to try to get the right to vote back for folks who have served their time. About 55,000 Minnesotans. And we worked that case up. We had to work it up in appeals all the way to the state Supreme Court, which ultimately led to a loss. But at the same time, we were working in coalition with a number of different organizations and community members to organize on the ground around this really important issue. And in the last legislative cycle, the Restore the Vote movement and campaign succeeded. And so we have 55,000 new eligible voters in Minnesota because of that.
And people who have served their time, who have done what they had to do, many of whom have gone to school for the first time while they were jailed and turned their careers, their lives around, and their families around. And yet, until this year, they couldn't vote.
That's right, and they have they're part of society. They're paying taxes. They're doing everything they're supposed to be doing, and they had been denied this fundamental civil right. So I mean, we're really proud of that case and the long fight it took to get there. And now we're committed to being on the ground, helping to inform those 55,000 voters of their new right and how to exercise it.
What about student privacy, data privacy?
That's right. So that was 2 terms ago when we had a split legislature. Right. The ACLU bill was one of the only bills to go through that legislature, and it was a Student Data Privacy Act that ensures, particularly in this kind of day and age where the Fourth Amendment and our civil rights and civil liberties seem to be catching up to technology. And we're in this moment post-COVID where all students were on screens, they were in all these conversations, to ensure that their data wasn't being given or sold or moved to a third party and then packaged and used in other ways. So it was a really important achievement, and it just it goes to that other issue of the really growing up of some of our rights to meet this technological moment.
Now, there's a group of students who were supposed to move into a building at the university, and it's not finished. I don't know if you were involved they're suing for a bait and switch to the construction company, and I don't know if the ACLU is in that, but I know that it just started a lawsuit there where it looks like it can be 6 months before that building is finished. Where were these students supposed to go?
I don't know. I mean, that's something we're not involved with. I've heard a little bit about it, but we're not involved with that one. Right?
I'm surprised that nobody has gotten in touch with you to get you on board with that one.
But there's a number of other issues. Obviously, we are tracking LGBT rights, transgendered rights. As we are seeing a remarkable uptick in anti-LGBTQ plus bills being introduced across this country. 496 bills are being tracked right now, and they're all attempting to weaken non-discrimination laws by allowing businesses and hospitals to turn away people for care, for gender-affirming care. And this is something we've worked on years ago. You know, we worked on for a transgendered student the right to use a locker room of their gender, and now we're back. You know, it seems that, you know, a decade ago, you know, transgender students might have not been under as much attack as they are today, which is...
You know, when left alone, these things worked out very well in society. When you get a right wing that's really dedicated to creating havoc is when we have problems such as we have today. And concomitant with that is really violence that's that's transferred to these people.
That's right.
It's not just the laws and the discriminatory laws, but there have been deaths, there have been terrible beatings, there have been all sorts of assaults, and what a sad measure on our society.
So I mean, in some ways, it feels like, you know, we're going backwards, right? You know, women's rights, the rights to abortion, trans rights, LGBT rights, voting rights, right? It feels like 1950s America in some states in this country.
Welcome to Alabama.
Right?
Just yesterday, a 3-judge panel of the Circuit Court of Appeals admonished the legislature of Alabama because they turned their back not only on that circuit court decision, but on the U.S. Supreme Court,
That's right.
which, much to my surprise, found out that Alabama had gerrymandered their districts. And
what is happening in states that some of their legislatures are hell-bent on suppressing the right to vote. And they're not hiding it, they are not covering up for it. It is blatant, and they are pushing the envelope in ways that we haven't seen in decades.
in arrogance, really.
Yeah.
And arrogance against law and order in many respects. And in many respects, they are fighting law and order. Defund the FBI, defund, really, they would defund the Civil Liberties Union in a minute if they could.
If they could, but you know, luckily we're a very strong membership organization, and they're not going to be able to do that. I mean, we've been around for 100 years, and we've seen lots of different shifts, and we're geared up. We're ready for this moment, and we understand that this is a long fight, and is one that we are designed to take up, no matter how it shows up. And we have a long history to draw on and a long legacy, and a lot of lessons that we can draw on.
Now, you had a very interesting case here that it just seemed to be a no-brainer, the decision which was Tyler versus Hennepin County.
Yes, yeah.
Here's an elderly woman. They foreclosed on her home.
That's right.
Because she hadn't paid the taxes. She moved, I think, into a senior citizen's home, and if I'm not mistaken, and the county had a windfall. They sold the home for taxes and came out like $40,000 ahead or more than that. And she asked for the money from her house that they got for not paying taxes, and Hennepin County said no. Tell us about that case.
Well, I mean, it's a common sense case, right? You know, and I mean, what's shocking is that, you know, not often does the Hennepin County end up in the United States Supreme Court, and not often do you have a unanimous decision saying that what they were doing was just plain wrong.
They were stealing.
And it took that long and took that much work to get to that point. Really shows that, it's pretty clear the government can't take more than it's owed. And it was a fundamental case, and we're really happy about that victory. You know, that was one of several victories that we were part of at the Supreme Court. So.
Now, one of the things that I personally want to do is get off the bandwagon, B-A-N-N-E-D, because all of a sudden we are seeing book banning
That's right.
from people who can't even, if they look at the Bible, they would ban the Bible, but they don't look at the Bible. And they're banning some classics that we all grew up with and help make us better individuals and better adults. And that's just one incidence.
That's one. I mean, I have a statistic here. The American Library Association reported that more than 2,571 unique titles were targeted for censorship last year, the worst year yet. This is a remarkable turn. Another moment where we did not expect that this was going to be another front that we would be fighting in. That, as well as we see school boards across the country passing bans on teaching topics like divisive or controversial topics, or topics that teach basic history or race history or biology.
Don't get me started on Florida.
Right, again, it feels like we are moving backward, and the chilling effect that has on your First Amendment rights, and a teacher is afraid to teach about American history. A teacher would be afraid to teach about biology because they're afraid that a government rule is going to make them lose their job, or even worse. This is not acceptable.
You know, what do you do with the statue of David? Do you cover up his genitals? I mean, really.
How far do you go?
This is a classic. We have had books that have been Pulitzer Prize winners. If I'm not mistaken, Nobel Prize winner also had a book banned by people who not necessarily have read them, but they've heard about them. It's just the height of ignorance, arrogance, and stupidity to me.
Well, I mean, American history is filled with controversial topics, and the First Amendment itself is about protecting controversial speech, even speech that you don't like. So I could only imagine what it would be like to teach the First Amendment in a school like this.
I can remember when the ACLU supported the right of Nazis to march in a parade. Now, it's antagonistic to everything, really, that most of us stand for, but it was their civil liberties that were attacked, and the ACLU was there to protect them, even if they didn't agree with the philosophy. Where has that gone today?
The principle of standing up for our civil liberties and the Constitution is front and center with the ACLU still today. It is important to note that when someone's free speech rights, for example, are suppressed, it is often a marginalized group, right? It is often a group that is historically marginalized, or a group of people of color, or a group that's seeking rights that they've long sought. So when you stand up for that right, you're standing up for those groups as well. The Skokie case was a long time ago, and things have changed remarkably in the country in some ways. In some ways, things have stayed the same. But when we make decisions about those types of cases, we're looking at a lot of different factors, our resources and our time. But in many ways, it is still a central issue for us.
I look across the border to Wisconsin, and I look at some of the things that they are going through there. And it used to be that the word impeachment meant high crimes and misdemeanors, or really malfeasance in office. Now the word impeachment is used for everything. They're trying to impeach a recently elected justice in the Supreme Court there because of something that she did back when. It's just another indication to me of an attack on civil liberties, an attack on free speech, an attack on the things that we think made this country great.
Yeah. I mean that's a really important note, right? I mean, it is a hostile time, And sometimes in Minnesota, it may feel like it's not as hostile, right? We do have the benefit of a very strong Constitution that protects our rights in some ways more than the federal government's rights can protect us.
And the Supreme Court in this state, which protects those rights also.
That's right.
But we know that these things can turn around in a number of years, in a very few years.
That's right. It can, we are, the state legislature is, it's one party by a few votes. Things can shift and change in any of these environments. But, our focus right now, like I said, with the Supreme Court shifting the way it has, the ACLU is really committed at this point to looking at
the U.S. Supreme Court, we're talking about, yeah.
Well, to putting our efforts in state Supreme Courts, in state legislatures, and pushing and ensuring our rights as many ways as we can.
And we have to urge people also to get involved in school boards, in library boards, and things like that, because the right wing has been insidious in creeping in here and is responsible for a lot of these problems that we've had. And we've been talking with Deepinder Mayell, who is a year and a half into what's going to age him very rapidly, the executive director of the Minnesota ACLU, and I wish you all the luck in the world. Back when I was a young lawyer, there are several cases back east that I handled for ACLU, and you've got a tough job. I wish you the best.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Like I said, it's a fight, and I'm happy to be in it. I feel privileged to be in the role, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Well,